Now, why are companies embracing the reentry internship? Because the internship allows the employer to base their hiring decision on an actual work sample instead of a series of interviews. And the employer does not have to make that permanent hiring decision until the internship period is over. This testing out period removes the perceived risk that some managers attach to hiring relaunchers, and they are attracting excellent candidates who are turning into great hires. Think about how far we have come. Before this, most employers were not interested in engaging with relaunchers at all. But now, not only are programs being developed specifically with relaunchers in mind, but you can't even apply for these programs unless you have a gap on your resume. This is the mark of real change, of true institutional shift. Because if we can solve this problem for relaunchers, we can solve it for other career transitioners too. In fact, an employer just told me that their Veterans Return to Work program is based on their reentry internship program. And there's no reason why there can't be a retiree internship program. Different pool, same concept.
But if I were to ask you a similar question, what percentage of the population do you think is capable of truly mastering calculus, or understanding organic chemistry, or being able to contribute to cancer research? A lot of y'all might say, well, with a great education system, maybe 20, 30%. But what if that estimate is just based on your own experience in a non-mastery framework, your own experience with yourself or observing your peers, where you're being pushed at this set pace through classes, accumulating all these gaps. Even when you got the A, that 95%, what was that 5% that you missed? And it keeps accumulating all the way that you get to a more advanced class, and all of a sudden you hit a wall and say, oh, I'm not meant to be a cancer researcher. I'm not meant to be a physicist. I'm not meant to be a mathematician. And I suspect that that actually is the case, but if you were allowed to be operating in a mastery framework, if you were allowed to really take agency over your learning, and when you get something wrong, embrace it, view that failure as a moment of learning, that number of the percent that could really master calculus or understand organic chemistry is actually a lot closer to 100%. And this isn't even just a nice to have. I think it's a social imperative.
But for these things that we actually do really care about and do experience profound regret around, what does that experience feel like? Well, we all know the short answer, right? It feels terrible. Regret feels awful. But it turns out that regret feels awful in 4 very specific and consistent ways. So the first consistent component of regret is basically denial. When I went home that night after getting my tattoo, I basically stayed up all night, and for the first several hours there was exactly one thought in my head, and the thought was, make it go away. This is an unbelievably primitive emotional response. I mean, it's right up there with, I want my mommy. And we're not trying to solve the problem. We're not trying to understand how the problem came about. We just want it to vanish. The second characteristic component of regret is a sense of bewilderment. So the other thing I thought about there in my bedroom that night was, how could I have done that? What was I thinking? It's this real sense of alienation from the part of us that made a decision we regret. We can't identify with that part. We don't understand that part. And we certainly don't have any empathy for that part, which explains the third consistent component of regret, which is an intense desire to punish ourselves. That's why in the face of our regrets, the thing we consistently say is, I could have kicked myself.
Have you ever taken inspiration from something David Bowie did? Maybe it was a fashion choice you made, or perhaps one of his lyrics helped you in some way. He was someone who inspired so many people, but also took so much inspiration from the world around him to explore different artistic directions. This is the Curious Collection, an audio trip down the rabbit hole available only on BBC Sounds for 7 days with me, Kimberly Wilson. To find us again, press the podcast button on the BBC Sounds app and we'll be on the scroll bar at the top of that page. This time, we're exploring the world of David Bowie, hopefully in a way that hasn't been done 100 times before. We'll be looking at him through the lens of inspiration and hearing stories of moments, people and places that directly inspired his work, as well as some tales from people who were inspired by him. Let's start with one of those. Grace Dent tells the story of Lawrence in this episode.
Welcome to the Football Bulletin from BBC Sport with me, Andy Barwell, bringing you the headlines for Thursday, the 9th of January. Spurs were 1-0 winners at home to Liverpool in the first leg of their League Cup semi-final. There was also a moment of history in English football at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. The BBC senior football reporter Ian Dennis was there.
Not many expected this. 17 days after losing 6-3 to Liverpool and decimated by injury and suspension, Tottenham produced a spirited display to end Liverpool's 24-match unbeaten run. They also lost Rodrigo Bentancur early on with a serious head injury, but the young Spurs certainly earned theirs. In the second half, Porro should have scored. Solanke did, but it was ruled out for offside after VAR, so we had the first use of an in-stadium announcement. That disappointment didn't last long as Solanke set up Bergvall, who struck his first goal for the club with 4 minutes left. Dragashin had made a goal line clearance from Alexander-Arnold, while debutant Kinski in goal made a fine reflex save in injury time, as Spurs take a slender lead to Anfield for the return in 4 weeks' time.
Well, the Tottenham boss, Ange Postecoglou, is not a fan of VAR or this new variant.